Our immune system is not just about sensing danger, it's also about responding very quickly before something gets out of hand or an infection becomes really bad. So one of the first and most powerful responses is something called phagocytosis, and it's how our immune cells, our white blood cells, will eat up bacteria and viruses and other debris and then use what they find to train the rest of our immune system. So phagocytosis is a very important concept in immunology. Phagocytosis means cell eating, and it's a process used by some of our white blood cells, so certain white blood cells, and we call those white blood cells phagocytes, where they will find, engulf, and destroy harmful invaders or pathogens or dead material in our body. So it's a very important part of our innate immune system, which means it kicks in immediately, even before antibodies are involved. But phagocytosis also helps activate our adaptive immune system. So it's one of the most important early responses to infection. So what types of cells perform phagocytosis? There are three main types of immune cells that are phagocytes, meaning they can do phagocytosis, and they're white blood cells. One of them is called neutrophils. Neutrophils are the most abundant white blood cells in our blood, meaning if you take a blood sample, you'll see a lot of neutrophils, and that's because they do phagocytosis. So they act fast and they arrive early at the site of infection or injury, and they're specialized in killing bacteria and fungus. Fungus are like mold or yeast infections, and they're short-lived. So after they do their job, they die and they become part of pus. So that white stuff that you see. There's also macrophages. These start off as something called monocytes in our blood, and they become macrophages when they move into tissues, and they're found in almost every tissue in our body. They live for a long time and they're very versatile. So they don't only engulf and digest invaders, but they also present pieces of a pathogen. They present antigens, MHC class 2 to activate T cells to turn on the rest of the immune system. And then finally, there's dendritic cells, which are also found in tissues like our skin and lungs and our intestines. And they're excellent at capturing invaders, processing them, and then traveling to our lymph nodes to change helper T cells. Their main role is to link our innate and adaptive immune system. So how does phagocytosis work now that we know that there's neutrophils and macrophages and dendritic cells involved? So it's a multi-step process, and step one is detection and recognition of a pathogen. And a pathogen is something that makes you sick, like virus, bacteria, other microbes. So the phagocyte, the white blood cell, the neutrophil, dendritic cell, macrophage will identify something dangerous like bacteria or viruses, and they will use something called pattern recognition receptors. These detect features common to many pathogens, and we call those features that are common to pathogens PAMPs, or pathogen-associated molecular patterns. So this process is even faster and stronger when the pathogen, like when the microbe is tagged by antibodies or something called complement proteins, which we'll learn about later. So these tags are called opsonins, and they make the target, the pathogen, easier to recognize and grab onto. And this process is called opsonization. A lot of times I tell my students opsonization and phagocytosis mean the same thing, but that's really the definition of it. So after that, we go to step two, and that's attachment. So once the target is recognized, the pathogen is recognized, the phagocyte binds to it using surface receptors. So think of this as your immune cell getting this firm grip before it pulls the pathogen in. And then step three is engulfment. So the phagocyte will surround the target with its membrane, forming this bubble-like structure called a phagosome, which is this like sealed compartment inside the cell that traps the pathogen. And then step four is digestion. So the phagosome fuses with another internal structure called a lysosome. And lysosomes are very important because they contain a lot of powerful digestive enzymes, and they have reactive molecules like hydrogen peroxide And so together, these form the phagolysosome, where the pathogen is broken down and neutralized. And then finally, step 5, which is antigen presentation. And this happens in some cells. So for macrophages and dendritic cells, their job doesn't just end with digesting the pathogen. So they'll find the pathogen, they'll eat it up, which is called phagocytosis. But these cells will take pieces of the destroyed pathogen and put them on MHC class 2 molecules, which they display on their surface, and then they float in your body, and this is how they communicate with other white blood cells called helper T cells, and they're essentially saying, here's what I found, something is wrong in our body, help me mount a proper response. So that's very important because it tells other parts of your immune system to turn on, like fever and inflammation and other things. So why is phagocytosis so important? It's important because it's our first line of defense. So phagocytosis begins really quickly. It's really quickly when someone is like there's an infection, a virus gets in you, bacteria or injury, and it doesn't need prior exposure. So these cells respond immediately, making it one of the earliest and most reliable immune responses. It also clears out the mess. So phagocytes don't just kill pathogens, they also clean up dead cells, debris, and any leftover immune material. So they play an important role in resolving inflammation and starting tissue repair, because after you have inflammation, that tissue also needs to heal. And then finally, they trigger the adaptive immune system. So even though they're part of any immune system, they trigger our adaptive immune system. So without phagocytosis, T cells wouldn't know what to attack. And so by presenting pieces of the pathogen through MHC class 2, phagocytes will activate helper T cells, which then activate B cells, cytotoxic T cells, and more parts of our immune system. And phagocytosis and disease are closely linked. So in some infections, pathogens have evolved ways to hide from phagocytosis, which is great for the pathogen, but it's really bad for us. So for example, tuberculosis is caused by bacteria, and this bacteria is really good at hiding inside macrophages, so it doesn't go detected, and your body deals with it in different ways. Also, in chronic inflammation, phagocytes can contribute to tissue damage if they stay active for a very long time, if they stay on. And then in conditions like autoimmune diseases, phagocytes sometimes mistakenly attack our body's own tissues. So to summarize this whole thing, phagocytosis is how our immune system identifies invaders, identifies pathogens, eats and destroys them, and then presents information to other